So hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session on strategies for managing a hybrid classroom. This is the sort of the third iteration of this type of a workshop that we've offered in the over the last year, as the classroom technology managed by our division of IT continues to evolve, and as our approaches and our students' needs continue to evolve as well. So my name is Stephanie Richter. I'm the Director of Teaching Excellence and Support in the Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning here at Northern Illinois University. And I encourage you to reach out if you have any questions about the classroom technology or teaching to a hybrid audience in particular. Before we go too far, I want to recommend a few resources for you. One of them is our Flex Teaching website. So this website was our initial Keep Teaching efforts from the spring of 20 evolved into this flexible teaching approach, which really focuses on more resilient and flexible pedagogy that can survive changes from in-person to remote to hybrid by focusing on some core essentials and fundamentals of course design and planning to anticipate those interruptions or those changes. We do have a brand new guide to hybrid course delivery that you may find useful. Most of the guides on the website are actually based on resources that Duke University put together and shared with a Creative Commons license. So we've adapted those for NIU, and you'll find that guide to hybrid course delivery from Duke and adapted for us there on the Flex Teaching website. And I'm going to start actually with a quote from Duke to sort of frame our perspective today, and that is that less is more. There are a lot of really complex things that you can do, but if this is your first time with live streaming, the best approach is going to be to start simple, add more as you go, and build that capacity over time, as opposed to trying to step in with a fully high flex environment. Start with something small, open your course up to some students who are remote, and continue to iterate and improve that experience over time, as opposed to starting with a really complex plan that then you have to pull things out of if things don't go the way that you want them to. So start with less and then build from there. If you haven't taught in a hybrid format before with students who are both in person and remote, I want to talk at first about some of the nuts and bolts about how this happens. This will weave in some of the some information about the classroom technology you might expect to see in your classrooms, as well as a little bit of some pedagogical strategies, but we'll dig into all of this as we go. And like I said, feel free to ask questions in the text chat or raise your hand if you want to ask a question on microphone. So the first fundamental kind of nuts and bolts piece of teaching in a hybrid classroom is that really what you're doing is running a web conferencing session. And certainly I think after the last year, we are all much more comfortable living in that virtual world than we had been in the past. So from that perspective, you already have a wide set of skills coming into this. You can choose to use any web conferencing tool that you're comfortable with. Here at NIU, the most popular ones are Collaborate, Zoom, and Microsoft Teams. And those are the ones your students will probably be most familiar with. And it's up to you to really determine which one maybe that suits your needs the best or which one you're most comfortable with. But all three will work perfectly fine in a hybrid environment. The second thing you'll do once you are in your classroom, after you have launched your web conferencing session, is you'll want to enable your microphone and camera in the room. So in Collaborate, you have those options here at the bottom, and you may need to configure the audio or video inputs depending on what's available in the room. You'll just need to select the appropriate camera and microphone for the technology you have available. So I wanted to point out in each session where that is in case you haven't used it before. So in Collaborate here, I think I've already mentioned to everyone that you configure your audio and video under the gear icon in the lower right. That's where you can launch the audio setup wizard in order to choose the camera and microphone that you want to use. In Zoom, you enable your camera and microphone in the lower left of your screen, and you actually configure your audio and video. You choose which microphone or camera you want to use using those little carrots that are right next to the camera and microphone buttons. So easy, quick and easy, those pop open a menu of the settings you have available, and any camera or microphone connected to your computer will be listed in those menus for you to choose. And then in Microsoft Teams, when you launch your session, you're actually given the opportunity to configure and select your camera and microphone. You can enable them from there. You can, of course, do so once you're in the session as well. But if you do it here, then you can configure your camera and your microphone in the same panels that those tools are listed in here before you even join the session. Once you've joined it, you can also access your device settings in order to choose a different camera or microphone perhaps. I point this out because it seems obvious, but it's also really easy to forget to turn on your camera and microphone when you start your hybrid streaming sessions. Usually because there are students in front of you who have questions and want to talk to you. So I usually do this right away, and then I know that I'm set up, and the students who are remote can hear what's going on in our classroom and can see us as we start to filter in, depending on what camera or microphone is available in your room. The next step then is sharing content, and this is where things may get tricky depending on what precisely it is you're trying to share in your classroom. So for most things that you would share on the projection screen in your room, such as PowerPoint, something that's on a website, another software application, you would do that via screen share or application share within the web conferencing tool itself. That means that then in your classroom, you can proceed just like you would if you were only teaching your in-person students, but now both students, in-person and remote, can see that content. There are other times, though, where you're going to want to think of your camera as content. One clear example of that is actually a document camera. If you're planning to use like an Elmo or the digital overhead document camera in order to show a book or an object, in that case, you're going to actually end up enabling your content as a video feed. In Collaborate in Zoom, you can actually choose that as a secondary camera. In Teams, you would just replace your webcam. Instead of having the view of the classroom, you would have the view of that content. And then in some of our spaces, particularly those in for example, theater and dance, the camera is the critical content because you are demonstrating something physical in person. And so you wouldn't share any other content likely because you'd want to privilege the content that's coming in via the room camera or another camera that you have set up in that space. So you have to think a little differently about what you're sharing and how that's going to be visible to both your in-person students and your remote students. And then you also don't want to forget to start your recording. In Collaborate, when you start the recording, that's automatically saving it into the cloud, into Collaborate's servers, into their storage. And Collaborate will in fact give you a pop-up reminder in the corner asking you if you want to start the recording. In Teams saves recordings to a couple of different places depending on how that team session was scheduled and launched. It might go to Stream, it might go to the OneDrive if you're actually running that meeting in a team as opposed to just scheduling a meeting. But you'll be able to find that often in the text chat from the session as well. And then in Zoom, you have the choice to record to the local computer or to the cloud. And when you're in a classroom, I would honestly recommend recording to the cloud with a little bit of a caveat. The reason I recommend that is if you record it to your local computer, you have to wait for that to process after you've closed out your session and then transfer that video file somewhere else. And in the classroom, you may have someone else trying to get in. You certainly need to to leave. And so saving to your local computer may not be the best choice in that circumstance. So I would record to the cloud in Zoom. But the caveat, the asterisk, is we have very limited storage for each person in Zoom's cloud recording. And so once you've recorded to the cloud, you'll want to probably take some of those recordings, download them, and move them somewhere else like Kaltura or O365, OneDrive, in order to then share those with your students. So if you're trying to record this for students to watch at a later date, you'll want to first make sure you've started that recording, and then secondly, that you have a plan for how you share that recording with your students. Recording is optional though. If your remote students are all joining live and you would prefer not to record and only to live stream in essence, you could certainly do so. But you may also have students who are remote who can't join you live, and so the recording then becomes a really critical part of the hybrid experience for them. So those are the steps. Launch a web conferencing session, start your camera and microphone, share your content, and start a recording. And insofar as we've done that for the last year and a half, I think quite a bit more than we have in the past, those should feel familiar. What's going to be, I think, the added wrinkle this time is having students who are in front of you while you're doing that instead of doing that from your home or your office, as well as using the technology in the classroom that you may not be familiar with. So we're going to talk more about all of that as well. First, though, starting with the classroom equipment. The Division of IT has been working for the last year on upgrades to our classroom environments. In some cases, this might be just replacing a computer, and in almost all cases, they've added some form of camera or microphone into a room. All of that information is available on their website at go.niu.edu/classrooms, and I'll put that link here into the text chat for you, for those of you who are in the live session. So that was quick and easy to click and go explore. On this website, you'll see information for additional training and just-in-time resources even, some videos on how you would set up your classroom, but then also a dashboard. The dashboard will show you the current status of classroom installation. Unfortunately, due to some delays in technology, the Division of IT is still installing equipment as we speak. So you'll see that dashboard continue to fill in and turn green as more classrooms are completed. You'll also find at the bottom of that page an inventory of what's in every room. So here, for example, right now it's a spreadsheet that you download. I think they're working on an easier format to view this in, but for right now, at the very least, you can use this spreadsheet to see what will be in the classroom that you're teaching in. And you can see that this is a really detailed list. So this is the Art Building 100. It's a large lecture hall. And so this room has, I'll just start with the instructor station, or you can connect a laptop. It has a sound system to play audio so that students in the classroom can hear audio from the computer. It has a computer and a monitor and a screen for the projector and a microphone. This room in particular actually has a microphone for amplification. Not all rooms will the microphone amplify you. In some cases, it may only be there for streaming. But then this room also has a document camera, a digital whiteboard, which is actually a touch pen monitor. We'll look at that in a moment. And it has a camera. In particular, this room has a Meeting Owl Pro. And we'll talk about what that means and what the different types of cameras that are in these classrooms are and how you would use them differently. But you can use this information from the classroom's website in order to find out what exactly is in the room that you'll be teaching in. We're not categorizing rooms by a particular type anymore, but there are sort of 4 general styles of rooms that you'll find. There are some that have no technology. They haven't needed technology before, and at this point they have not yet had any added. The second type of room that you'll find is sort of a traditional classroom that had no tech before, but now has a computer on a cart. And so the computer on a cart would have no projector and is primarily used for streaming. You're not going to be able to use that computer cart for sharing content with your students in person, but you can use it in order to run the camera, microphone, and the web conferencing session for your remote students. There are very few of these, but you'll see PC carts on the dashboard when you look at your classroom if that's the case. In others, whether it is a computer cart with a projector or, again, what we think of as a traditional smart classroom, you'll find that the classroom has a computer and a projector, and they may have additional technology on that equipment list. But all of these I want to differentiate from the interactive flat panels. So these are called IFP sometimes. The interactive flat panel is a really large touchscreen monitor. It's really almost more like a tablet on steroids, just a gigantic tablet. So you can actually use that touchscreen monitor on its own. You can run your PowerPoint slides from there. You can run a Teams or a Zoom session from that flat panel, that IFP by itself, or it can be connected to a computer. You may have an instructor station in that room, or you might connect your own laptop to that display, either via HDMI or you can actually wirelessly cast to those as well. So these are really cool devices. Again, they're touch screens, so you can use that as a digital whiteboard. But then you also can run your PowerPoint, you can show websites, and you can run your web conferencing session from the display itself, whether or not a computer is connected. If you're looking at coming to some of the other sessions this next week that will be hands-on in classrooms, I would strongly recommend only attending that interactive flat panel if that's the type of classroom you'll be teaching in, or if you want to see that type of technology. If you're in a more traditional classroom, you're not going to learn how to work in your classroom if you attend that IFP session. It's just a very different approach. So then in a classroom, you'll see in many of them some form of classroom control. This it turns on the projector in the room, and it also determines what is shared from the instructor station to the projector. On the left is a touchscreen model, and the right is an old-fashioned click button. Those are ancient, as you can tell. They're from when media services controlled classrooms instead of the division of IT. In other rooms, some of the rooms right now that are receiving full upgrades are going to have actually neither for their classroom control, and instead there will be an application, a small program on the desktop of the instructor station that you use instead. When you're in your classroom, that will function more like the touch panel, again, where you'll choose to turn on the system and then pick which button in the program determines what goes to the projector, as opposed to more of the actual physical buttons. But if your room is receiving a full upgrade on the dashboard, then you'll have that software application on the computer. And then I mentioned in that classroom inventory list that it mentions what type of camera will be in your classroom. There are actually a wide variety of cameras across the campus right now, but these are maybe the 4 main types. Some classrooms are going to only have a traditional webcam, so kind of like what's actually on top of my screen right now that I'm using to talk to all of you. The traditional webcam has, of course, an integrated microphone, but it only has one direction of view. So if you want to be seen, you'll need to stand or sit behind the camera or turn the camera to pick up others. But it's static and it's in one place. Some of the full upgrade rooms, in fact, most of the full upgrade rooms, are going to get a PTZ camera, which stands for Pan Tilt Zoom. So these cameras actually can move. And your application, your control, whether that's a touch screen or a program on the computer, will let you choose what angle, what direction that camera should be pointing. So you can actually move it to look at different places in the classroom. It does not have a built-in microphone, so you'll need to use another source for the audio, but that camera is high definition, has a really crisp, clear picture, and you'll have some options for camera angle with the PTZ camera. The meeting owl at the lower left is actually, it's about the size of my water bottle, come to think of it. It reminds me of an Amazon Alexa device, too. So the meeting owl is an all-in-one camera, microphone, speakerphone. When a meeting owl is in a room, that dome on the top of its head, I can't help anthropomorphizing it. It's the lights that look like eyes. The camera on top of its head is actually a 360-degree camera that will display everything that it can see in the classroom, but then it also focuses itself based on where audio is coming from. So if you're speaking, it would focus on you. If a student is speaking, it would focus on the student. The meeting owl itself, the column of the meeting owl has an array of microphones and speakers and can pick up a wider range. The 360 webcam at the lower right will be in most of the same rooms that the PTZ camera is in. You'll actually have a choice of which camera you'd like to use in those spaces. The 360 webcam does work similarly to the meeting owl, where it can pick up a 360-degree view, but it doesn't focus on where the speaker is. This one has just a static view, but in a 360, and then that diamond at the top can rotate, so you can choose whether you want it to pick up a 360 view or if you'd rather it function more as a traditional webcam and point it in one particular direction. There are actually other classrooms that have one other type of camera. These are fairly specialized and they're not available in most classrooms, but some classrooms with an art cart will have actually a DSLR handheld like Canon camera, and these are designed for use in spaces where positioning the camera is really important. So again, these are most frequently found in our theater and dance rooms so that the camera can be placed to focus on a specific performer or on a model or a sample that the remote students would need to be able to see. And then for microphones, there are sort of two general camps that your microphones will fall into. One is an integrated microphone. So if you have a webcam, a traditional webcam, a meeting owl, or the 360 webcam, these all have a microphone built into them. The webcam has the smallest range and will pick up whoever's right in front of it, whereas the meeting owl and the 360 webcam both have a wider range to pick up a speaker. The other microphone you may have is a wireless lapel microphone. As I said, in some cases, particularly large classrooms and lecture halls, this will actually amplify you as well so that you can be heard by all of your students in person and remote. But in other rooms, this won't make you any louder, but it is what picks you up for the remote students. So even if you're in a small classroom, if you see a wireless microphone and you're planning to live stream, you will probably need to use that in order to be heard by your remote students. They're not Samsung brand. The Samsung one here was the best picture I could find in order to know what, to give an example of one. And then the other way that I like to think about microphones is actually divided slightly differently. If you have a webcam, a traditional webcam, or the Samsung, or I just said it's not the brand, or the wireless lapel microphone, then those are only going to pick up you. So if you're standing near the webcam or sitting in front of it, or the wireless lapel microphone will be clipped to you, and so as you move around, it's just going to pick up you. Whereas the meeting owl and the 360 webcam have approximately a 20-foot range for what they pick up. Obviously, the closer you are, the better it picks you up. The further away you are, the sound quality does kind of drop off. But in particularly a smaller classroom, those two will help you to pick up anything that the students say in a classroom discussion in person as well. Whereas the other two, you're going to need to definitely repeat what students have said for the remote students to hear. So as you're thinking about the space that you're in and what style of teaching you're in, then or what style of room you're in, you'll want to think about how your remote students are going to hear both you and the other students in the classroom. So Heather, how do you know what microphone you have? Um, for the most part, I don't think right now that they are listing the microphones because there are a wide variety out there right now. If it has a traditional webcam, you're probably going to end up using the webcam as your microphone. In many cases, those webcams were put into rooms that didn't have other microphone systems, and that's the solution for picking up audio in those rooms. If you are in the room and if it's a full upgrade room, then it should have another audio source as well. Although if it's a full upgrade, it wouldn't have a webcam. So I'm trying to logic through in my head uh, what I expect to be there based on what the Division of IT has been doing. I would assume if it says traditional camera or traditional webcam, that's what you would use for your microphone in that room. I also mentioned that most of the upgraded rooms have a digital whiteboard pen monitor. And this is a tough photo to see, but there's actually a pen kind of stuck to the base of that monitor. This is a touch screen, although it only responds to the pen, it wouldn't respond to your finger. And it allows you to annotate directly on your screen. This is important in a hybrid or remote learning situation because your camera may not pick up the whiteboard well. If you have a traditional webcam, a Meeting Owl, or even the 360 webcam, it's difficult to read what's on the marker board with those cameras, and the Meeting Owl wouldn't necessarily even focus on the whiteboard depending on where you're standing and where it's placed. So in those cases, using the digital whiteboard instead is a much better solution for your in-person students and your remote students to see the same thing. If you're using PowerPoint, you can actually turn on a pen directly in PowerPoint. If I can get my mouse to work. Here I can actually turn on a pen and write. I'm writing with a mouse, not a pen. So forgive my lack of quality with my scribbles here. When you have the pen, it's much more natural than trying to write with your mouse. But you can annotate over PowerPoint this way. You can use a blank slide in PowerPoint as a whiteboard, or you can use another tool as well, like a digital whiteboard in your web conferencing tool. All three, Collaborate, Zoom, and Teams, have a whiteboard built in. Or something like OneNote. OneNote has fantastic handwriting capture capabilities. And that might be another option for instead of using a marker board. Before I move on, a couple more questions, Gina. The Meeting Owl you used the app on the phone so that it always focused on you. That is great. I haven't personally used it enough to get the app to work for me, but there is an app for the Meeting Owl that does have that functionality. So that's something I think next week, since you've brought it up, Gina, I'll experiment with that next week while we're doing our training more. But it does help to always then focus on wherever that phone is in order to lock on. The Meeting Owl as well, if two people are speaking, it can split the screen and focus in more than one place too, which is great for kind of quick dialogue and discussion. Great, Gina, thanks. I may talk to Anthony. And then Todd, do you know what is included on an art cart? So an art cart has, at minimum, a computer with a monitor. It won't be a touch pen. It'll just be a traditional monitor. And then an art cart will have that upgraded handheld camera, the Canon DSLR style camera most likely, so that you can use that to focus on what you wanted to show to the remote students. An art cart may or may not, some of them have projectors. I'm not certain where those are. So in some cases, you may be able to use the art cart to project content for your in-person students as well. that may not be on the art cart you have access to, I would check with your department, with the college office, on where those art carts are being stored now and how they're being distributed, because those are mobile. So a cart may not always be in the room when you need it. You may need to work with your department or college office to know where those are being stored and to make sure that one is in the room when you need it. No problem. All right, so looking now at managing the classroom. The tech, I encourage you, if you can come to one of our sessions in the next week. Let me back up for a second. I would attend a session based on the type of camera that will be in your room. There's a lot of similarities, but if you have a room that will have the PTZ and the 360 webcam, you'll want to come to one of those sessions. If you're in a session with a traditional webcam or a meeting owl, you could come to any of them. We can demonstrate that functionality at any of them other than the IFP session. If you're in a room with an IFP, that interactive flat panel, then you'll want to come to that session. But if you're in a PTZ room, if it says it has a PTZ camera, come to one of those PTZ sessions so we can demonstrate how to use those cameras. All right, so managing the hybrid classroom. Let's talk about pedagogy and strategies for how you try to teach in person and online synchronously at the same time. The first thing that I think, if you approach this from a sense of equity and of community, you'll go a long way, even if the technology has some hiccups along the way. As long as you're focusing on ensuring that your remote students feel that they are valued and included, then I think you'll start from a good place. It's important as well to think about what experience those remote students are having, because it's very easy for us to fall back into in-person habits, even though we haven't been potentially in an in-person classroom for quite some time, and focus on the students who are right in front of us. So as long as you're thinking about the equity and the experience of those students who are remote, can my remote students see this? Can they hear us? If I'm going to do this activity, how will those students also participate? Then you'll have a better experience, and those students will do better because of it. In general, I would recommend using digital tools instead of handing things out on paper or using a marker board. This might be a great time to ask students to bring their laptops to class. They can participate then, everyone, with a digital tool like a survey tool or an interactive activity. And then instead of the marker board, this is where I would recommend using that touch pen display, so that, again, the students who are in person can see that on the projector, and the students who are remote can see that in the web conferencing session. If you have a TA, or if you don't have a TA, if you can get a student volunteer from the class to be a liaison for remote students, again, this is a huge benefit, or a great technique for keeping those remote students connected. So if you have at least one person in class, like I said, whether it's a TA or just a student volunteer, who can be the connection and the liaison with those remote students. They can monitor text chat to see if there's conversations going on. They can let you know if the remote students report that they can't hear or can't see something, and they can act as a second set of eyes for you then. I know that not everyone has the advantage of a TA, certainly, but usually someone in the class or several people in the class are more than happy to join that online session from their device and help everyone stay connected. If you're teaching a long class that's going to be live streamed like this, then I recommend taking more frequent breaks. We all, I think after the last year, have come to understand how very real Zoom fatigue is and how difficult it can be to stay focused for that long. So giving the students, particularly remote, an opportunity to take a break and relax will help them out. It also gives you an opportunity to connect with them. So if you give everyone a break, but use that chance to see if the online students have had any additional questions that weren't answered, or if they were having any issues, you can take a quick moment to connect with those remote students without the challenge of trying to work with both in-person and remote students simultaneously. Particularly in larger classrooms, or if you have a wireless mic or a traditional webcam, you're going to want to make sure that you repeat some of the in-person conversation for those remote students. Just because those microphones aren't going to pick up the students who are in person. If you're having a discussion-oriented class, then you may want to think about some other strategies for how the in-person students can be heard remotely, so that, again, that discussion is more inclusive and there isn't a lot of dead air that the remote students don't get to hear and participate in that discussion. And then if you've worked in had any work in a studio, then you know that one of your best friends is a confidence monitor. So a confidence monitor is a way for you to see what is going out to your remote students or what's going out to the broadcast. In this case, if you open the session on your own laptop and the instructor station, or even your smartphone, you can use that as a second screen so that you can see what your remote students can see right then. I would make sure that you have your sound muted on those devices, because otherwise you're going to set up a feedback loop. The same goes for any students in your classroom who have the session open. They should mute the sound on theirs as well. But that way you can use that session on your laptop or on your phone in order just to check. Okay, so I think I switched my PowerPoint on with AppShare. Can they actually see it right now? Or I'm now moved over to the document camera. Can my students see what is on the document camera? Just so that you can be confident in what's going out to your students, and you can then keep an eye on exactly what they're seeing. When you're preparing for class, then preparing for a hybrid class takes a little bit of a different strategy as well. We're used to thinking in kind of one plane when we're planning our classes, and thinking about how we're going to actively engage our students, how we're going to get their attention, how we're going to activate their learning. And now you have to think about all of those things for both your in-person and remote students. So you could have a really fantastic activity planned for your in-person class, and you need to take a moment to reevaluate that and think about whether or not your remote students are going to be able to see what you're doing or listen to what you're doing. A great example of this is if you share a video. If you play a video in class, make sure that you've planned ahead for your remote students to be able to also see that video. If it's on the computer and like a YouTube video, when you use application share, in all three systems, there's an option to choose to share your computer audio with your remote students. It's an added step, though. You need to make sure that you enable that checkbox when you start your share so that your remote students will be able to see that. But I would also then, for something like a YouTube video, suggest reevaluating whether taking class time is the right time for students to watch that. If it's something that you can share before class and have students watch it before they come in, or if you can give them a moment on a break for everyone to watch the video and then come back ready to discuss, the students will have a better experience, particularly remote students, than if you're trying to stream a video over potentially limited bandwidth. When you're planning an activity, think about how your students will be able to participate in that. If you do like a think, pair, share in the classroom, it's a really quick and easy activity to do with in-person students. With remote students, now you need to think about how are they going to have a similar experience of perhaps pairing up or as a larger group discussing what the topic was. And if you only have one student who's remote, then who are they going to discuss with at all? Again, this is where a student volunteer who can be the liaison might be a great opportunity to pair them up with someone. And then I already alluded a little bit to this, but when you're thinking about your remote students in particular, and what you're doing with your in-person students, what value are your remote students going to get from watching what's going on in person? A good example of this might be a discussion. So if you have a classroom discussion and you haven't created a way for your remote students to participate, what value will they get from watching their classmates discuss? I'm not saying they won't get any, they will. But how do you then turn that into a learning outcome for them? If they can't actively participate in the discussion, how can you make watching it into something that is a valuable experience for them? I may have some strategies later on, but some things to think about just now would be turning that into an opportunity for the remote students to engage in an alternative activity. Maybe they watch the discussion and then reflect on it with a written reflection, or they create a short video. As an outsider, having watched that experience, they can still learn from it, but you may need to add another layer of activity for them. So then, since I talked about using digital tools instead of paper, let's talk about what types of digital tools you might use in a hybrid classroom. I think one of the first things that comes to mind, if you have students in person, kind of go around the room and introduce themselves or talk about their experience, is thinking about ways that your in-person and remote students can both do this. You may still have your in-person students do that in person, but the remote students can introduce themselves via a discussion board, maybe via VoiceThread, where they can record either their webcam or a few slides of a PowerPoint about themselves with some audio, or Flipgrid, which is actually Tracy's video there was done via Flipgrid, where each student can record a short video via a webcam or a smartphone and introduce themselves, or it's a great tool for reflections as well. And then once you've moved some of your remote students to doing a virtual introduction or a virtual version of the assignment, you may want to have all of your students participate that way as well. Again, thinking about that equity of experience. I do have a slide, but in class discussion. Great. Okay, so during class, your remote students can probably use their microphones to speak up in class. Depending on, and you may need to experiment in your own classroom a little bit with this, depending on the potential for audio feedback, you should be okay, but if you experience feedback, you may want to cut that off and find another route, in which case students who are remote can use the text chat. And in fact, the text chat in the web conferencing session can become, in essence, a back channel for all of your students to participate with one another in real time. If it's not possible for students to participate in discussion in class, for example, if your remote students are watching the session recorded instead of live, then after class, then maybe they post their own comments to the discussion board or a journal. They can use that to reflect on what they saw in the classroom discussion and kind of comment on that as opposed to participating directly. They could also reflect using VidGrid, Flipgrid, anyhow, using video or any other video tool. I'm confusing my tool names now. There are too many of them that are similar. So then, or they can summarize perhaps a counterpoint that they share with their classmates in some way, a message posted again to a discussion board or another channel. This is also a great time, I think, to bring up YellowDig. YellowDig is an alternative discussion board that we've licensed here at NIU, and it's more of a combination of discussion board and sort of social media platform that's private to the students who you permit, whether it's just your single class, or you can combine communities across classes as well. But in YellowDig, it's specifically designed to reward positive community behaviors like posting early instead of waiting until the deadline, posting things that are more interesting so that your classmates want to comment and respond to it. And it also rewards you for responding to others or encouraging others through emojis and badges and things like that. YellowDig, as opposed to a traditional discussion, YellowDig doesn't facilitate having static discussion questions as well. So it really encourages autonomy for students and allows them to take initiative and self-direction in choosing the content that they do share and the direction that they are inspired to go with the discussion. You can set some guardrails for them, some suggestions, but you don't set a specific discussion question the same way that you do with a forum, perhaps. And then all of that turns into a more natural, free-flowing community that students actually want to post to. It is automatically graded, so if you're using YellowDig for in an online class, for example, as part of a grade, then YellowDig will automatically grade all of that participation based on parameters that you set for the types of behaviors you want to see. So in a hybrid class, you might use this to supplement in-person discussions for the remote students or for all of your students. Or, as I said, you could use this also as a back channel where your students who are in class and your students who are remote can participate together at the same time while the class session is ongoing. I'm going to put a link in the text chat for those of you live to YellowDig, to our information about YellowDig at least, if that's something that you are interested in exploring. I would also recommend that you find digital tools for checking for understanding, particularly for your remote students. In person, we have a tendency to use the fact that we can see students, we can see confusion or puzzlement on their face. An in-person student may also be more likely to speak up and ask a question than a remote student would. The remote students, that feeling of distance may make them reluctant to speak up, even more reluctant than our in-person students are. So building in some opportunities to check for understanding will benefit all of our students, but particularly our remote students. And all of these tools that I'm recommending are things that your in-person and remote students would use simultaneously, so you don't have to set up multiple systems or different ways to do this. So if you haven't used Kahoot, Kahoot is a blast. It's basically a trivia game where you set up multiple choice questions and students have to respond quickly to those. They can earn points. There's a leaderboard. It's up to you whether or not that translates into a grade or if it's just a layer of competition for fun. But it can give you and the students themselves a sense of whether or not they understand the topics that they've been learning about. Poll Everywhere is a freemium tool, so it's free for up to 40 students. If you have a larger class, unfortunately, you'd have to pay for it. But with a smaller group of students, then Poll Everywhere is a survey tool where you can ask a variety of different question types. Some might be more quiz type, like correct answers. Some of them might be more open-ended, in order to give students the opportunity in person and remote to respond and check their own understanding. And then if you wanted a survey tool that is open to everyone, then you might try Microsoft Forms. That's in Office 365. It is available to everyone under our Microsoft license that Do It maintains, and it is really easy to use. We also have a license to Qualtrics, which is a much more robust survey platform, but is probably overkill for what you need to accomplish in this type of an environment. But Microsoft Forms also has an option to enable that you require that students sign in. So you can use a Microsoft form as an anonymous survey, or if students have had to sign in to O365 first, then it actually captures their name and their ID so that you can use that as potentially an attendance check or for awarding points in some way if that was what you wanted to do. And then if you would normally in person have students maybe give a performance or give a presentation, your remote students should have the opportunity to do so as well. You can always have them do that live if particularly something like a presentation that might be more slide-based or that uses a web application. They could screen share in your web conferencing tool and give that presentation really quite seamlessly for your in-person students to watch. But if it's something that's more complex, something that's more visual, you may want to instead have students record those performances, particularly your remote students. And then you can have a virtual film festival where everyone gets to review and watch those performances. There are a lot of ways for students to record themselves. The easiest one is probably recording with their smartphone. They could then upload that to Kaltura or to OneDrive, but Kaltura is a great tool for that. Kaltura also has a tool for recording from their webcam or recording their computer screen uh, that can make those presentations or performances more rich. VoiceThread has a tool where students can record audio or webcam over some slides. It's a little bit easier to use, perhaps, because it's more segmented. They can record and re-record a particular slide if they wanted to in order to get it right. And then there are a lot of other free or mostly free or sort of free tools out there that you may find a better fit for. But there's particularly your remote students can find, there are a lot of ways you can find for them to give a performance or a presentation that then still connects to your in-person students, so they can have the feedback from their classmates, or at least the sense of community from their classmates seeing their performances. Quickly, you will probably run into some technical issues in a hybrid classroom. The more complex the situation, the more complex the technology, the stronger the likelihood that something may go wrong. So if you're in the session and either there is no microphone in your room, or for some reason the student's remote cannot hear you via the microphone, then my best recommendation is, there are two of them here. One is to use a secondary device, a laptop or your smartphone, to log into the session again and use that as your microphone. In this case, you would want to mute the sound on the classroom computer so that you don't get a feedback loop. But you could then, for example, if you were in the session on your phone, you could walk around with your phone as the microphone instead of using a lapel mic. If all else fails, all three systems now, Teams, Zoom, and Collaborate, have options for you to dial in via telephone as well. So if you can't get into the session with your phone or with a laptop and you just want to call in, you can call in from your smartphone as well. And again, walk around the classroom and use that as your microphone so that students remote can then hear you. If you're in a room that has no camera, or it has a traditional webcam and you want a different view of your classroom, for no camera, then you could go ahead with no video. In most cases, again, this just depends on your content and depends on your pedagogy, but if your class session is mostly driven by things you can display on the computer, then what's most important is that and your audio. The video of you and the video of the students is a nice to have. It can build more sense of community and connection. But when it comes to learning, the most important thing obviously is your content. And if your content can be app shared, then you might want to just move on without a camera for now. If there's a demonstration that you need to have be visible to everyone, and the camera in your room isn't sufficient for that, then you may want to record those in advance with your smartphone. Again, either handheld or, oh, I put it away. I had a little tabletop camera for my phone just setting out because I had not yet put it away. But something like that you can record a video and post it to Kaltura is really helpful. Or the webcam, you can sit at the instructor station for you to be seen, but these do just sit on the monitor. I wouldn't unplug them, but you could lift it up and move it around to aim it somewhere else. My final thought is just to reiterate that less really is more. Start small, build more as you go. There's also a sense of scale here. I think many of these tips might be more appropriate if you have a lot of students who are remote. If you only have one student who's remote, work with that one student to find alternatives and find ways for them to participate or for them to do an alternative activity. Don't assume that you have to go fully remote or fully hybrid for one or two students. You have the autonomy to determine how they achieve those same outcomes and how they demonstrate what they've learned. So start small, add more as you go, and be willing to be flexible when things aren't as successful as you'd like them to be, or if there's a better approach that you come up with. And then again, the go.niu.edu/classrooms is the site for all things related to classroom technology and the changes that are still ongoing for this fall. And then, of course, flexteaching.niu.edu for additional thoughts, resources, tips, and guides around teaching both in person or online or a hybrid combination of the two. So then, Heather, I see you have a question. I'm going to pause here and take a few before we run out of time. If you have to be remote, but some students are still in the classroom, I would question in that case whether, if you are remote, whether having the students in the classroom has a strong benefit, or if you should try to do this online. You might want to talk to your department about that expectation. If there are students who are still in the classroom, then I would definitely work with at least one or several of them to be the leader of the group of students in the classroom, so that one of them comes in, launches the session for all the students who are in person, and then they'll have to manage the technology. But the other option there is if they're in the room, as long as they have laptops with them, if one of them joins the session and turns on their microphone, then they could probably just work from a laptop even without moving to a projector and that level of complexity. It would depend on how many students were in person. If you had 60 students in person, someone needs to probably set up a projector and behave more formally. If you have 15 students, then they can probably sit in the classroom with their laptops and talk to one another that way. Oh, you're welcome. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. And then if you have any other questions, feel free to keep those coming.